What's up, guys? It is episode 2 of the Pitre podcast. Jesus Christ, it took me like 15, 20 minutes just to set this damn thing up. I need like a designated podcast station. Don't get me wrong, like I love my overall layout, but it's getting a little much. So we got to figure this out. I'm kind of like out of breath trying to figure everything out. Just double checking everything to make sure we're good, and we are good. Different setup, as you can see. We have the freaking Christmas tree to my right. We have whatever it is in my bookshelf to my left. At the time of this recording, it is December 3rd, 2024, year of our Lord. So it's right around Christmas time. Next couple episodes, you're going to see all this Christmas stuff in the background, to be honest with you. So I'm in a Christmas mood. I got my Christmas pajamas on. I got my Nuts shirt. I got my Phillies hat. I am not a Phillies fan whatsoever. Disclaimer there. I don't hate the Phillies, actually. I actually kind of like the Phillies. I'm a Mets fan, born and raised New Yorker. I live in Philadelphia, of course, so repping the Phillies hat on. I don't hate the Phillies, man. I really don't. I feel like Philly fans and Met fans have a lot in common in that we're always fucking losing, never winning anything. That and like I don't understand the hostility. Like we have a common enemy, in the Yankees. So why are we fighting each other? And it doesn't make any sense to me. We just come together and be friends and just collectively hate on the Yanks. But anyway, on this episode, I'm going to be talking about therapy. So I'm going to be touching on a lot of aspects of therapy, in particular, the different kinds of therapy that you can see, when to know if you need therapy, my personal experience with therapy, when to know if you need specialized therapy or just some general therapy, and last but not least, do we rely on therapy a little too much in this day and age, specifically my generation? So everyone who is of between, I would say 15 to 30, therapy is heavily emphasized. So I want to determine or just look at it from a third person perspective if we're just overusing therapy in a way that we really shouldn't. But yeah, I'm going to be touching on all of that for this podcast episode. I'm also going to be looking at my phone. It's not because I'm texting or ignoring you guys, it's because that I have a lot of notes written down on my phone. So in order for me to effectively really look at it and make sure that I'm staying on track, I got to look at the damn thing, unfortunately. So I'm going to jump into it. And when it comes to therapy, man, there's so many different kinds of therapy out there, to be honest with you. But before we even get into the different, segmented kinds of therapy, I think it's helpful to go over what therapy is. So the broad kind of definition of therapy is treatment intended to relieve or heal a disorder. As far as the different forms of therapy, there are so many under the sun. I was actually kind of shocked into how many different forms of therapy there are. There's CBT, there's ACT, there's couples therapy. There's honestly, man, the list just goes on and on and on and on to the point where it could kind of get overwhelming into what exactly you need. If you need any special help or just some general therapy and just talking to someone over your problems or your past or your trauma, etc. So, as far as my experience goes, so I did two kind of forms of therapy, right? And before I really get into therapy, I think I need to give like a general background. And I'm just bringing this up for the sake of the topic of this conversation. I really don't like bringing this up at all, really talking about it all that much, but I think it's obviously relevant to what we're going to be discussing here today. And that is, I personally have OCD. Now, I'm not someone who just says, oh, I have OCD because I like things clean. That's not me at all. Like, I got professionally diagnosed. I could have got medication for it. I chose not to, but I'm going to go over that in a little bit later. But yeah, I have it professionally diagnosed. This occurred. I really started to display symptoms, I want to say 4 years ago. Actually, 5 years ago. Fuck, it's been that long. It's crazy. But I've been displaying some general symptoms of it for years. I want to say almost 10 years or so. But it really started to kick in effect around 5 years ago. And there's a big misconception into OCD, which is that a lot of people just think it's in regards to cleaning. So like cleanliness, cleaning things, not liking germs, etc., which is one of the subsets of OCD. So there's multiple different forms of OCD, which is pretty surprising to a lot of people. That being cleanliness. So even within cleanliness, there's different forms of cleanliness. So there's like a genre, then subgenres within that genre. But in cleanliness, you have like people who needs to clean everything, who hates germs. There's people who are scared of diseases and like contracting, AIDS or getting cancer or things along those lines, and their obsession compulsion is around that. There is religious slash sexual OCD. I'm not sure as to why those two go hand in hand, but they just do. Religious OCD can be anything along the lines of like, if I don't pray today, then I'm going to go to hell or something along those lines. Sexual OCD can be like having sexually intrusive thoughts. And there's so many different genres of OCD. I don't think I have them all memorized, to be entirely honest with you. But if you do your research, you'll see that there's multiple different genres of OCD just outside of liking things clean. So just counting OCD, another one just popped in my mind, where you're constantly having to count things. So like if you're walking, you just say you're walking home from the gym, you have to count all the steps you did walking home. And if you mess up, then there's people who literally would walk back to the gym to restart, to count all the steps they did to walk home from the gym or things along those lines. So regarding OCD with any mental health disorder, it varies as far as severity. So there's people who have OCD, but doesn't bother them much. They can live their lives and it's just in the back of their brain and it only comes up during certain times, etc. And it's other people who have it very severe where it literally it stops them from living their daily life to the fullest. With me personally, I would say it's on the lighter side, so it's not as severe. Before it was more severe, but that's why I did therapy so that I could get better and that I can effectively live my life without having the not having the mental health disorder bother me from day to day. I'm gonna go over as far as like the therapy process and things along there. But yeah, mine is now on the lighter side. It really doesn't bother me anymore. I mean, OCD will always be there. Once you have OCD, it's literally never going away. Like there's nothing you can do. It will never go away. It'll always be part of you. But there are times where you might, your OCD might be kicking your ass, so to speak, and it's bothering you nonstop. There's other times where you can go days without doing a compulsion. And I just went through OCD for minutes and didn't exactly explain what it is as far as like its concept and what are some of the symptoms that people do. So obsessive compulsion disorder is when you have, I'm going to use the aspect of cleaning, for example, in that genre. So someone who has like cleanliness OCD, they have intrusive thoughts, right? They would have a thought and it would pop into their brain, and the thought would be so disturbing to them that it would make them do a compulsion, which is an action to kind of like counterbalance the thought, or kind of like um, like stop the thought from getting worse, or if they feel like if they do this thing then the thought will go away, or if they do this thing then it's confirmation that the thought is not real. So one thing to understand with people with OCD, when it comes to their thoughts, it can seem realer to someone who doesn't have OCD. And what I mean by that is, for instance, if I have cleanliness OCD, right, and I feel like I'm just dirty and there's germs all over me, I have to constantly be washing my hands like the guy from Aviator, the guy Leonardo DiCaprio depicted in Aviator. I'm blanking out on his name, but I have to constantly be washing my hands because I'm dirty and I have to get the filth away, right? For someone with OCD, that thought feels so real, right? They have trouble distinguishing what's just a passing thought, a passing intrusive thought, and what's like really real to them and like detriment to them if they need to do this thing in order to feel this way, etc. So for someone else who doesn't have OCD, if their hands are dirty, to them it's just like, yeah, my hands are dirty. It's not the end of the world. I'll clean them in a little bit. Like it is what it is. Some with OCD and their hands are dirty, they're thinking, the germs can affect my body, germs are crawling all over me, I can die, or I literally feel the bacteria on my hands. Of course, they don't actually feel the bacteria, but they, in their mind, they think they feel the bacteria on their hands, so they have to clean it to get it away, etc. So that's what I mean by when people with OCD, they can't really determine if a thought's really real or if it's just their OCD thoughts kicking in. Um, so the obsession would be the subject, in this instance, contamination, and then the compulsion would be the action, where in this instance would be cleaning my hands or my body, etc. So that's OCD in a nutshell. As far as which OCDs that I personally have, I have a form of, I actually have three, unfortunately. um, Typically, people only have one subject of OCD, but your OCD can switch between the subgenres. So if you have contamination OCD, at first it can just be, cleaning your hands and cleanliness, but eventually it can now become infectious disease and being scared that you're going to contract AIDS or get cancer or things along those lines. So you can have one genre and move between, the different subgenres, as you like, age, or if you did therapy to get over one subject and another subject could pop in, etc. So it's rare for someone to have multiple different genres. Unfortunately, I have three. The first one being cleanliness, but in the part of like contracting diseases. So that's where my OCD, I wouldn't say really started for another one, but that's the one that really like, kicked everything off in full swing. So I was just, bro, I was scared of just contracting diseases, man. It happened kind of out of nowhere. I can't really pinpoint where it occurred. I know that COVID didn't really help it. But dude, I was just terrified of contracting diseases. I would literally spend hours of my day looking up STDs and just different diseases, to the point where I can, like, off the top of my head, if you give me a name of a STD, I can give you the symptoms and what would happen to you and what are the warning signs, etc. Like, I would just look at this shit for hours, and not just STDs, but numerous other diseases. But I would just look at that stuff for hours and read about it for hours, and I would check my body for hours just to see if I'm like displaying a symptom or etc. Even when I did testing, and I did so much testing in order to show that I don't, to tell myself that I don't have these diseases. It came to the point where, the doctor was like, bro, like, you're here all the time. Like, you're good. Like, you're freaking out about this. Like, you're fine. You shouldn't be getting tested this often. Like, the freaking professional doctor had to tell me that. But I was constantly just getting checked and checking myself for diseases, and compulsion wise, I would do that shit for hours, like literally just checking myself, checking symptoms, looking at, symptoms and how it looks like online, etc., photos and that kind of stuff. So it was just, I would spend so much time doing it. Another kind of genre I had of OCD is religious OCD, which is where honestly it all first started. And for this one, I would say the contamination OCD sucks. This one sucks more. So it's various degrees of sucking. So the contamination OCD, yeah, it sucks, and do all this stuff, but it wouldn't affect me that much, even though I said did compulsion for hours. This one didn't really affect me that much. The religious OCD, on the other hand, that one really used to kick my ass. And basically, it would be that, for example, like, if I'm watching something, like, I couldn't watch horror movies or anything, because if I watch like a religious based horror movie with ghosts or demons, etc., like, I would think that would happen to me, and I would freak out, and I would read the Bible and I'll pray, etc. And I would hear like a voice in my head. Basically, it's my voice, but it's not me. It's the best way I could explain it. It's my voice, but it's not me. And it would just say things that I didn't agree with, religiously, like, oh, you want to be possessed, or you want to go to hell, or things along those lines. And it would keep saying it over and over and over again in my head. and I couldn't do anything about it. Like I literally like my only the only thing I would do is to like pray or try to like shut it out in some way. But imagine just a voice in your head that's technically your voice, but it's not you, just constantly saying this over and over and over and over and over again. And you're just like freak. And it's in the middle of the night too, of all times. Like what happened at 2 a.m. and I'm getting this shit nonstop. And I'm like, fuck, man. Like I can't go to sleep now. Like I have to sleep with the fucking lights on. Or because my mind is just freaking out on me right now. So the obsession would be religion, the compulsion would be praying or reading the Bible or things along those lines. There's a third one, which I'm not really going to go into because I don't really feel that comfortable talking about it, even though like that's the one that affected me the most. That's the one that I did therapy the most. And it really doesn't bother me today, but I don't know, I just don't want to talk about it yet for whatever reason. But that one whipped my ass the most. That one I would like, fuck, bro. That one used to get me a lot. I used to spend hours upon hours just doing compulsions. And when you do a compulsion, you can act out the compulsion where I can do a physical activity, or you're doing a compulsion in your head, right? And the whole point of a compulsion is to relieve the thoughts. So if I do this, it makes things feel better. The issue with the compulsion is that it actually makes it worse. So in therapy, just to jump the gun here, just to give you a quick insider, for specifically for OCD, they're trying to basically like facilitate an OCD thought. They're triggering you to have OCD thoughts to make you uncomfortable, and they're making you not do compulsions. And that's the goal. Like that first couple of seconds where you have an OCD thought and you're freaking out internally and you can't do compulsions, it literally feels like your world is about to end. But the more you do that, the more you stop yourself from doing compulsions, the less you would want to do compulsions, and in turn the less you would want you the less your mind would go into those intrusive thoughts. And when you do have those intrusive thoughts, it doesn't bother you as much because you're like, oh, it's just a thought. Like, yeah, I can do a compulsion, but I don't really feel like it right now, or I know it would make it worse because now I'm self-aware of doing compulsions and just OCD in general. So I'm not going to do it. I'm going to ride out the wave. I'm going to feel uncomfortable for a little bit. My world's going to be fucking melting down in my head, but I'm going to write it out and eventually it would get better, etc. So that's the whole premise of therapy with OCD. But going back to what I was talking about beforehand, yeah, the other one, the one that affected me the most, dude, I would do compulsions for hours, man. I would act out compulsions where I would like visually make myself see the thing that I am uncomfortable with seeing or the thing that I don't want to happen just to see my reaction. Or I would like, try to like look basically that. Like I would just force myself to imagine these things or these scenarios, etc. And I'm just like, bro, just to see my reaction, see if that's truly what I want or is that just an OCD thought. So I would constantly do that nonstop for hours on hours a day, either internally or acting it out. And acting it out, I'll do a bunch of other things that just, if someone who is an onlooker were to see me, it will make me look fucking crazy. When it comes to compulsions, I would only do it for the most part in my house, which I was living alone at the time. So I was able to like do as many compulsions as I wanted without having someone see me, basically. So which is not good. So I was just like, bro, just waste so many hours doing compulsions. And afterward, just like, it doesn't mean anything at the end of the day. Like, yeah, just it's compulsion. I don't know if the thought is real or not. There's nothing I can do. I'll never truly know if the thought's real or not. And I'm just you're just stuck there. Like I just wasted 2 hours of my day doing bullshit where at the end of the day it's meaningless. It's not going to change anything. I'm still going to have the thought. I still don't know if the thought's real or not. And now I just wasted time doing these actions where what was the point of doing it in the first place? And it really got to a point where, you know, it was really obstructing my life and I was starting to do compulsions outside. And my compulsions outside would be like, there's certain things I would do. Like if an OCD thought came in my head, I would like shake my head in a certain way, or I would like clench my fist really hard. I remember one time I was dating some girl. And we were on like a third day or whatever. We're at a restaurant and I'm like freaking Arthur fisting like that, one of my hands on the table. She was like, "Yo, are you good?" I was like, "Nah, I am not good." And I told her like I had OCD or whatever, and told her like at the moment it was whipping my ass. And she was kind about it. She's like, "Yo, we could leave. We don't have to be in this restaurant right now, like or whatever." And I'm like, "Nah, let's just power through it. Thug it out." As you would say. So yeah, there was times where it would start to affect my outside life, and mostly when I was outside and about in society, I would do the compulsions in my head. But now the compulsions starting to act out compulsions little by little, and that's why I'm like, okay, I need to get therapy. Like I can't, like I don't know if these thoughts are real or not. I don't even know if I have OCD. I would research OCD. I'm like, yo, I'm displaying every symptom, but I don't even know if I have it, which is like common for people with OCD. They're like in denial that they actually have it. But at first, I went to a platform. This is the segue going into the topic of when to know if you need specialized therapy or not. So I went to BetterHelp, which is an online therapy platform that a lot of people utilize. Is very popular nowadays. You see the freaking YouTube apps literally everywhere. But when BetterHelp, I was trying to connect with a therapist, and I was just like, as I'm talking to the therapist, I've been going back and forth with the therapist. I just knew I needed a specialist. Like, there's nothing that was wrong with her. She was a great therapist. She just wasn't equipped to help me in my needs because I had, moderate OCD and I'd never been diagnosed before and I never had to handle this before, or it's like really crashing down on me for the first time ever. And I just am freaking the fuck out. So I needed someone who can, one, specialize in OCD therapy and who has handled OCD clients or clients who have OCD in the past, which I don't think this therapist did. So not a knock to BetterHelp, but if you just need some general therapy, so someone to talk through your trauma or someone to talk through your day or someone to talk to your stresses, then I recommend doing some online therapy. It's a lot cheaper than the alternative of going to an actual therapist, etc. But if you think you are displaying signs of like a severe mental illness, like OCD, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, that kind of stuff, please do me a favor and seek out a specialist for that kind of mental health disorder, or someone who handles in that kind of or has clients in that kind of mental health disorder, because not going to a specialist can just honestly make things even worse and would be a waste of money for you and a waste of time for you and a waste of time ultimately to the therapist as well. So I sought out a specialist. So I sought out people who specialize in OCD and people who can help me with my OCD. And it was fucking expensive, dude. It was so expensive. I remember talking to one therapist that a session was like $1,000 each session. And I was at the point of giving up. Like, dude, like, I'm living on my own. I have good money, but like, I can't spend 4,000 a month on fucking therapy. And since my OCD was really starting to kick in, I would need to do, or it was best if I did therapy once a week. I would have to do it once a week. So I have to spend $4,000 on therapy, which is like no one has that kind of money, especially because I'm living in New York. It's already expensive. So thankfully, after doing research, I reached out to people who specialize in OCD in New York City. I'm blanking out on their name. If you are listening to this and you want to know exactly who I reached out to, the company I reached out to, therapists, etc., please contact me and I'll let you guys know offhand because I'm blanking out on the name of the company and actually my therapist now. But yeah, I reached out to them and we went over pricing, and thankfully it was something that was in my price range. So basically I would have to pay a little under $200 for each therapy session. And the thing is, when it comes to therapy, 9 times out of 10 is not covered by insurance, which is fucking insane. Like, well, why isn't therapy covered by insurance? It doesn't make any sense. Medication is covered by insurance, but the therapy is not. Don't, our healthcare system is cooked, to say the least, but that's not what we're here today. So thankfully it was a price point that I can realistically do from week to week, and I started my journey in therapy. And a specific therapy that I did was CBT. So now segue into my experience with therapy. So I'm going to go over to some basic points in regards to what CBT is. So CBT is based on the concept that your thoughts, feelings, physical sensations, and actions are interconnected. And that negative thoughts, feelings can trap you in a negative cycle. So basically, CBT aims to help you deal with overwhelming problems and thoughts, and is more positive way for breaking them down into smaller parts. So the point of CBT, as I said beforehand, is to expose you to your fears or expose you to your trauma, or in this case, expose me to my obsessions. So it's going to facilitate causing these obsessions. And in doing so, the objective is to kind of rewire my brain and to not doing a compulsion, and instead just letting the thought be, letting it simmer in my mind, not acting out on it. And eventually your OCD will start to get better because of that, because you're now not doing compulsions. But going into some of the advantages of CBT, so it can be completed in a relatively short period of time. In comparison to other talking therapies. So me in particular, I did therapy. I did two sets of therapy. I did the first set, which was extremely hard because now I'm confronting my fears, I'm confronting my compulsions. So initially it's going to be challenging. With all therapy is going to be challenging, but at first, man, it's those first couple of weeks is really going to be tough. But I did CBT at first for 9 weeks, 9 to 12 weeks. So between 9 and 12 weeks, almost 3 months. And then I stopped for a year. I did it for another year, and I did that for like 6 weeks, I think, 6 to 9 weeks. And then I didn't need to do it since, thankfully. So in this case, does therapy work? Yes, in my case, it most definitely does. I'm going to go over that a little bit later. The highly structured nature of CBT means that it can be provided in different formats, including in groups, self-help, online, etc. So there's flexibility there. It teaches you useful and practical strategies that can be used in everyday life, even after the treatment is finished, which I can definitely attest to. It focuses on a person's capacity to change themselves and their thoughts, feelings, and behavior, which I alluded to beforehand. It can be as effective as medicine in treating some mental health problems. It may be helpful in cases where medicine alone has not worked. So personally, I did not take medicine. They would have prescribed me SSRIs if I were to take medication for it. And the doctor did recommend me it because I had moderate OCD and I was having a real tough time with the therapy sessions. I wanted to see the first 3, but I decided to thug it out and not do SSRIs or antidepressants because I didn't know how it would affect me. Because there's times where I've heard that, the SSRIs made things better. It made things worse. It kind of like changes who you are and how you think and structurally your mind and your behavior and your emotions, etc. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to subject myself to something that could possibly make me worse. So I decided to thug it out and just do it for the first 9 to 12 weeks. And if I'm not getting results, then I'll move on to antidepressants. But thankfully, never did it. And honestly, I don't think I ever will need to. Some of the disadvantages of CBT, because not everything is all positive, of course. You need to commit yourself to a process to get the most out of it. And seeing a therapist every single week or every 2 weeks is definitely tough, man. There is a lot. There's an accountability aspect to it, of course, and it's not easy, especially when you're confronting something that you don't want to confront, or you don't want to, like deal with, or thoughts that you have on a daily basis that you try to avoid, but now you have to confront, in person, face to face. It's not easy. There's homework associated with CBT, so they often give you homework on things to do, which sucks too. So I got to work a full-time job, then I got to get homework afterwards. Not exactly fun. It involves confronting your emotions and anxieties, which I talked about beforehand. It does not address any wider problems in a system or families that may have significant impact on someone's health and well-being. That is definitely true. So it just goes over the surface level of your issue. So in this case, it only touched on my OCD, but it didn't touch on why my OCD occurred. When it comes to mental health or mental illnesses, excuse me, it's it can occur because environmental. So oftentimes people who have, who grew up in abusive households and that kind of stuff or suffer that kind of abuse, they tend to have a mental illness. Or it can be hereditary. So if like if one of your parents or if a mental health issues runs in your family, then you can get it. Fortunately, I had both of those factors coming into play for me, so I was kind of doomed from the start. Trying to do from the start. But those are some of the positives and some of the negatives of therapy. Now, going into my personal opinion of was therapy worth it? As I said beforehand, dude, absolutely. Now, since I've done therapy, I've done freaking months of it. I went through the grueling process of it and confronting my intrusive thoughts, my OCD thoughts. Dude, I don't do compulsions anymore. I go weeks, like I go weeks upon weeks, sometimes even months without even having an obsessive thought or intrusive thought come into my mind. And even in the times where it does come into my mind, it doesn't bother me. There used to be times where if I would get high or would drink, that's when the intrusive thoughts would affect me the most, or like, it would be the hardest to control because I'm inebriated. But now if I do that stuff and I get intrusive thoughts, I don't care. Like it doesn't affect me at all anymore. And I can't even recall the last time like I acted out, like physically acted out compulsion. I think it happened like a few months ago where like I had an intrusive thought and I'm like, basically I was like, let's do a compulsion. I didn't need to, I decided to do it anyway. And I did the compulsion. I acted out the compulsion, and literally like a couple seconds into it, I'm just like, this is a waste of my fucking time. Like, why am I doing this? This is dumb. Before, that was not possible. Before, I would have spent, I'm not even kidding you, literally hours acting out that compulsion to determine if the thought is real, and I will never get an answer. But now I'm okay with not having the answer to my intrusive thought question or, things along those lines. I'm just okay with it. I can ride out the storm. It really doesn't bother me anymore. So does therapy work? Yes, it does. Is, it's going to take some work on your end too if you're looking to do therapy. It's not going to be a walk in the park. It's not necessarily going to be easy. A good therapist is going to kind of challenge you in a way. They're not going to like coddle you and tell you everything's okay. They're going to make you do like, homework. They're going to make you confront, some of your fears or some of your trauma or, so a good therapist is going to challenge you in that regard. And therapy is not supposed to be easy, but at the end of it, you're supposed to be better. I'm saying you're supposed to be because, everyone's, I'm blanking out on a word here, but everyone's, I don't want to say interaction because interaction doesn't really work here. Experience. How I blank out on experience. Everyone's experience is different. So for some people, they have really positive, like me, really positive experiences with therapy. Other people, they have really negative experiences with therapy. But just to speak for me personally, it was a positive experience and I most definitely needed it. I can't even imagine not doing it, to be honest with you. Yeah, I'm not trying to sell you therapy. I'm not, because I'm going to get into this. Not everyone needs therapy. Huge shocker there. Honestly, I think we're kind of over relying on therapy, just to jump the gun there as well. So I'm really not trying to sell it on you. What I'm trying to say is it was beneficial for me personally. And just like my thought process now is so much different from, my thought process prior to therapy. Like when I look back on all the compulsions I did for hours and I can't imagine doing that today. Like I look back at that and I'm like, wow, like what the fuck was I doing? Like, why? It's crazy because when I look back on it now, I'm just like, why did it bother me so much? Weirdly, when at the time, literally, I was losing my mind, like not figuratively, like literally losing my mind. And looking back on it now, and I'm like, why was I spending that much of my time, that much of my energy on it? Like, I can't imagine doing that now. I can't imagine going back to that now. It's possible. Don't get me wrong. It's possible to go back to that. But I just can't imagine it now. And that's all thanks to therapy. And lastly, going into the last topic of conversation here, which is, are we over relying on therapy, or specifically my generation? So some little points of statistics here, which is 23% of Americans are currently seeing a therapist. 43% plan to start seeing a therapist. So they haven't yet. So basically, 1 in 2 people are looking to see a therapist, just haven't done it yet. 1 in 5 people are actively currently seeing a therapist. Around 25% of adult women have received some form of mental health treatment in the past year, compared to 15% in men. And in 2020, so this was a little dated, 25% of adults, 20% of white adults, the whites, 25% of the whites receive therapy, compared to 50% of black adults and around 12% of Latino and Hispanic adults. And perhaps most importantly here, 86% of people said that therapy helped them cope after receiving therapy. So basically, almost everyone is saying that therapy in some form or fashion was a positive influence on their life and has helped them in their trauma or mental health issues that they're having, etc. So statistically, it is positive, and maybe you should do it. But do I think we're over relying on it? I would say yes, and that is because I don't think everyone really needs therapy. I'm going to be honest. I think that, if and I'm not saying that to discourage you to not do it. If you are looking to do it, you're like, it's really in your mind to do it, and you're like, hey, like I'm really thinking about doing this, you should go ahead and do it. Like, my experience has been great. 86% of people said their experiences has been great. So you should go ahead and try it. But I don't necessarily think everyone really needs it. And for the people who are actively doing it, the point of therapy is to get to a point where you can self-soothe. You're not supposed to be in therapy for years on end. That's not the point of therapy. And I feel like that little aspect of we're getting away from a lot in our culture nowadays, specifically my generation. You're not supposed to be seeing your therapist for, and I'm not just saying that from my personal opinion. I've heard other therapists say this. Like, eventually the point of therapy is to get to the point where you don't need your therapist anymore. Not because your problems went away, because you are able to self-soothe and able to handle your problems or handle your mental illness, like how I am. Like, the point of therapy is not for me to go to my therapist every single week, because if I'm going to my therapist every single week for years on end, things are not getting addressed here. I'm not moving forward. I'm not progressing. I'm staying stagnant, And that's someone who has like an active mental illness, or not someone who just wants to talk about trauma and things along those lines. Especially if it's just like past trauma and that kind of stuff, then you have to get to a point where you can eventually self-soothe and you've dealt and finished with that issue. Yeah, it's still going to be there. Don't get me wrong. The feeling's still going to be there, but now you can effectively move forward with your life. You're not supposed to be going to therapy for years and years and years on end, because one, that takes away from the therapist. So now they have to have you as a client, even though realistically they know you really shouldn't be a client anymore anyway. And that stops them from getting new clients who actually need their help in the moment, who need their help now. But they don't have the time because they're handling clients who are effectively like, they're good to go. They can freaking run off on their own. They can leave the nest. If they need to come back for a time to talk about an issue, a 1-off or a 2-off or a 3-off, you can do that. But you're not supposed to, be in therapy for years consistently on end. That's just not how it's supposed to be. And again, that's not just me saying it. I've heard this from multiple other therapists as well. So I do think that overall, I think we're kind of overly relying on therapy. And it's getting to the point where a lot of therapy talk is kind of invading our culture. So a lot of people are saying, let's unpack this, or they're using a lot of like therapy terms, and they'll do it in such a narcissistic way too, or such a manipulative way, where they'll use therapy talk to like kind of manipulate the other person to make it seem like they're being positive and they're being helpful, when in reality they're actually being manipulative. I've seen that bunch of times. There's people who are judging you if you're not going to therapy. So there's, and this is definitely in the case of like women more so than men. Men don't really care if a woman goes to therapy, to be entirely honest with you. At least I'm speaking on my behalf and the men I know. But I know there's a lot of women out there that are like, if the guy didn't go to therapy, then they're not interested, or that's a red flag. How can it be a red flag if you don't think you need it, or if you truly don't need it, or if you truly don't have any like, debilitating trauma? So I think we're getting to the point where it's good that a lot of people are exploring therapy, and I think definitely my generation is going to be the most mentally healthy. My generation and generation after me are going to be the most mentally healthy, um, and mentally positive. I think is starting to hinder us. I feel like we're starting to get a little too coddled, and we need to kind of get away from that, because some trauma is good. At the end of the day, you don't want to have a life, you don't want to go through life when there's no issues. One, it ain't possible. Two, it's not life. There's going to be issues. You're going to have traumatic experiences. You're going to have things that are going to make you uncomfortable. And you just have to deal with it. You have to go through with it. Yes, you can, do therapy here and there, but to think that any little issue that occurs in your life you have to go to therapy for, it's just not realistic. And not only that, there's a lot of people that are come this is coming from someone who actually has mental illness, right? So I'm kind of like, I'm in a way you can kind of say I'm being hypocritical or whatever, but it's a lot of people that are saying, oh, I got anxiety, or I can't do things because of my ADHD, or I have anxiety or whatever. It's like, if you compare, and I'm not trying to compare mental illnesses here, but when we realistically look at this, and I'm going to hurt a lot of people here, but when we realistically look at this, like logically look at this, put your own feelings aside here. If you compare someone with social anxiety to someone with schizophrenia, they don't compare. And again, I'm not trying to say one is, when we logically look at it, one is worse than the other. Let's be serious here. But someone with schizophrenia definitely needs therapy. They definitely probably need medication. That's someone that has like a legit debilitating mental illness where it literally affects their reality. OCD is on that boat too. And again, there's various degrees of OCD, and there's various degrees of schizophrenia, of course. Bipolar disorder, multiple personality disorder, those are disorders that, are really debilitating to people. And again, various degrees, like I said beforehand, to reiterate that like the millionth time. But, I feel like we're overemphasizing social anxiety, ADHD, and that kind of stuff in our culture now, to the point where everyone has it. Like, we can't all be anxious. We can't. We can't all have like, and again, like I'm not the most extroverted person. Like, I'm extremely introverted. Like, I don't have an easy time making friends. Like, I don't do well in crowds and that kind of stuff. Like, that's just naturally who I am. So I guess you could say I have social anxiety, whatever. But we can't all be anxious. Like, it's not realistically possible. We're all anxious, and like, how can we function in society? We can't all have ADHD. We can't all have the inability to pay attention. And I feel like all of that, especially those two in particular, are getting really heavily emphasized in my generation, and definitely the next generation. So the younger generation, I forgot what generation that is because I'm millennial, Gen Z. So I feel like definitely for millennials and Gen Z, we're overemphasizing that stuff. And it's like, I'm not trying to say you don't have it. I bet you do. What I'm trying to say is that it's really not that big of a deal. And I know that's going to piss off a lot of people, but I'm comparing that to people who have like legit mental health disorders, like fucking schizophrenia, for example. Like, there's no way you're going to try to compare your ADHD to me for someone who has schizophrenia or someone who has bipolar disorder. Like, and I know, again, it's going to piss off people, but let's be logical here, guys. Like, we know this. Let's not lie to ourselves. I'm not trying to, you don't have to belittle yourself to say, oh, their mental health disorder is worse than mine. But we know that someone with schizophrenia, they kind of, don't have it together. They Sorry, my phone just went off. I think it was work. Please, for the love of God, stop freaking giving me notifications. That's what happens when you have work on your phone. Okay, cool, whatever. So anyway, going back to my topic at hand. So again, I don't want to keep reiterating the same points and walking through circles here, but I feel like we're kind of over relying on therapy just a little bit in our day and age, and we're kind of just like leaning into, everyone being anxious and everyone having ADHD and et cetera, everyone having trauma and et cetera, et cetera. I think that we kind of, definitely my generation, we got to get over ourselves a little bit. And the flip side to that is that the previous generation, boomers, Gen Z, et cetera, they didn't do therapy. A lot of them didn't do therapy and just walking around with trauma, with mental illness, with this, with that, and just completely unchecked and fucking everyone else over, fucking the whole younger generation up. So it's good that we're evaluating this as society, yes. And I do think, our kids are going to live better lives because we are aware of our emotions and our trauma and our mental illnesses, etc. But I do think we're leaning a little bit too much in that direction, and we have to kind of pull it back, And that's just how it is. Like, that's the ebb and flow of life and society. A couple generations ago, none of this stuff was ever talked about. If you went to therapy, you were a loony or you need to get locked up in a mental asylum. If you had a mental illness, you got locked up in a mental asylum. You never talked about your trauma. You just suffered in silence. So that was the old generation. Our generation is complete opposite of that. Any little trauma you got to talk about, be completely open with mental illnesses, etc. We got to find somewhere that's in the middle. The answer is always in the middle. I'm going to reemphasize that a lot in my podcast because that's truly what I live by. I think the answer is in the middle for all situations. There's always a gray area. No matter how black and white you think something is, there's always a gray area. Trust me. And the answer is almost always in that gray area. So yeah, that's my personal opinion on therapy, my experiences of therapy, if we're leaning too much into therapy in our society. I am aware that I went in circles a little bit towards the end there, so sorry about that, guys. And I hope you guys enjoyed my Christmas theme, and you're going to be seeing that, a lot of that, for the next incoming episodes. And tune in for next week for the next topic. Thank you, guys.